Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da.
Welcome to your awakening. Please take all as your reality is adjusted.
Good morning, Global Gulag. Welcome back once again. Another edition of Excalibre on this moon day evening. The sun is still up and shining. I might end up having to put the light on later. But we shall see as we get closer to the middle of the year, the longest day. Should hopefully have sunlight for a bit longer. And I should have done the singy bit at the start. Jab the world. Psychosocial engineering. Jab the world. If you're not old enough, you might not remember that. I know you must have remembered it, Pete. Did that spark a bit of flashback?
Was it the feed the world, which never happened? Really,
yep.
It's still feeding. It's still, it was all a scam, all of it, back in those days. Yeah, I finally realised that.
Despite the mountain of evidence, which has got bigger and bigger and bigger over the years since then, the world poverty, or certainly the worst forms of abject poverty, because I know some people will argue that you need that kind of wealth differentiation, to encourage people to work and things like that. But anyway, the worst aspects of poverty could be completely solved, fixed. Nobody living in abject poverty anymore for approximately 3 billion. Whereas I think the Oxfam study that came out several years ago. Yeah, but back in what year was it?
85.
Yeah. 85. Yeah. The Feed the World campaign with, the usual slew of celebrity talking head faces leading the charge, for charity. We want to feed the world for charity. And you had the big hit single, do they know it's Christmas time and all that kind of stuff. Do you know it's Christmas? It was just still stuck in the 2 weeks thing. Yeah. Does that mean the Christmas of last year has sort of been stretched out? We're stuck on an event horizon where 2 weeks seems to be lasting for 2 years, and it may even be a little bit longer.
I think we should ask Bob Geldof how it all worked out. So, for him.
Oh yeah, he's quite well off, thank you.
Yeah, Sidefish just for the comment there. He run off with lots of gold or whatever, or lots of bling. He did well out of it, put it that way. And so did a lot of the other artists who put themselves up for that event, and on a text of like, we're giving our services for free, like it wasn't going to affect their careers in a massive way, and they were going to make loads more cash. Yeah, it's just all back then. How asleep we were. I think it was 18. I was about 18 when that came out, or when that happened. 84, 85 time it was. I think the Christmas single that year was 84, I think, and then rolled into 85 and had the concert. The big one that,
I think I was at the stage then when I was still enamored of the concept of big government, because that was leading up to all the Tony Blair shit. So I was of the opinion that we could fix all that kind of problem. We just needed to get the government institutions and infrastructure to work on it, all that kind of shit that was given to me by the school system.
Yeah, that it would work. It's going to work. It will work eventually.
Just vote for the right guy. Which one's that? The one we tell you to?
Or the pedo, or the whatever, or whichever country you happen to be in, whatever president you have, and whatever, crazy bastard that's running it for you.
And I think it was an example of the celebrity philanthropist say that with difficulty without
Well,
teeth. Yeah.
I'm not
Philanthropist.
even going to attempt it, Cookie.
Yeah, back then it was all the celebrities that were presented as philanthropists. I think because of what happened through the 70s, and there was a various, certainly in the UK, I'm speaking from a UK perspective, there was a lot of austerity, even though it wasn't called austerity back then, you know. And people coming out of that into the 80s, you had that kind of, what's the word for it? I was going to say rampant, but that's not quite a good word. But it was the building up of that kind of wealth accumulation that led to the 90s and the era of the yuppie and the greed is good and all that kind of shit.
Yeah.
So I think people were still somewhat disliking of big money people. So you didn't have like people like Rockefeller or whatever, you know, Kissinger popped up every now and then in the politics news, but you didn't have those kind of people. How can I call them? They're almost institutions unto themselves. But you didn't get those kind of people being presented to the public as a philanthropist. You know, even Richard Branson, who was only just starting to climb up on his pedestal at the time, he wasn't presented as being like a businessman or a financially influential celebrity figure. He was just promoted as if he was a celebrity. So the public could tolerate celebrity philanthropists. So we had like Geldof and Bono and whatever, Bonio, you know, being presented to us as being like the face of philanthropy. But through the 90s, it's slowly changed back. Like it's gone back a century, where now we've got the super wealthy business people, business moguls and whatever being presented as philanthropists, you know, offering you a shilling.
Yeah, and doing these things like, well, Bezos in the news going into space. Did you mention that before?
Yeah, I didn't see that one. You mentioned it before we started.
And he's taken his brother with him. So it's.
I do speculate though whether that won't actually be him. It will just be one of his clones. Because I'm dubious to accept that somebody like him would risk such a flight, a journey. You know, when does this indicate that he's got to the stage where he's now successfully cloned himself? So, you know, he's going to send one of his clones.
Well, maybe, but he's tweeted. I read an article today about it saying he tweeted that it was his dream. This is what he's always wanted to do, go up. And I'm not sure how this is all going to, I don't know what they do. They fly out, come back in or whatever. I'm not sure what the actual mission is.
Is he going to board Moonraker?
I'm not sure. They're going to throw him onto the International Space Station. I don't know. But they're going to fly. He's stepping down, isn't he, on July the 5th, 2 weeks before this.
They're going to study him in zero G in the lab on the space station.
And it's his own Amazon-built rocket and everything. It's all built by them. It's all their stuff. So whatever. We shall see. But he's in the marketplace, isn't he? Space travel now. You know, like Musk. You know. Like say they've offered these people up more recently, you know, in the last 20 years. You know,
that's what I mean as well about that kind of. Now it's more the moneyed people, and I'm not saying that to be derogatory, but they're people who have a large amount of wealth or financial ability about them. You know.
Yeah.
They're not just a celebrity. Yes, we've still got the celebrities doing their usual thing, but now the public has been acclimatized to seeing faces like Bezos as being the face of philanthropy, you know, like Billy Bob and whatever, Billy Bob Gates.
Well, him, yeah.
Although
all they need is to set up, that's all they do, set up the foundations, set up the charities, set up the organizations, get all the funding, and then they're all, you know, as we know with Gates, it's an horrific story. Just about to say that. It is. It's just I gave up at one point because I just thought it's just all awful. You know what he's been up to, what he's about, what the whole thing is about. Eugenics, really, ultimately.
That's what it all links into.
Eugenics. That's what we said even before all this bullshit started with this pandemic bombs.
I
You know, I
know.
mentioned eugenics before. It was, funnily enough, a show about 3 months, 4 months before. But yeah, that's where it all is at, and that's where these people seem to always want to direct their energies into, especially Gates.
Yeah. And I think I'll talk from my own point of view, because I've been talking about this kind of stuff for years. I've seen more than enough information to have confidence in my conviction that this is exactly what they are doing. This is not speculation. This is not just theorizing. They are working towards a eugenics goal. I know I've done this a lot recently, but yet again, I highly recommend James Corbett's work recently. I think now that he's finally been pushed off YouTube and he's working primarily on all the other platforms and whatever, plus his own website, of course. But now he seems to feel more confident in speaking openly. You know, you can tell if you watch his work, or if you watched it over a few years, you can see the difference between how he tried to present information on YouTube, on GooTube, where I always had the sense that he was stopping short. He was always stopping, holding back a little bit, because he was sticking rigidly to information that could be referenced for a mainstream audience, which is a good thing. You know, if you're trying to reach that mainstream audience, give them information that they feel they're at least some confidence of what they're looking at. You know, they feel a little bit of trust in what you're showing to them, even if it does cause them to question their paradigm and whatever. But now he's been a lot more open. And the last one he put up, interestingly enough as well, it was sort of carrying on from the kind of conversations we've been having for nearly a year. And recently, in particular, that one article about the bioconvergence, which we spoke about, and I talked with Camille and Anonymous on the Ice Cream Social shows, and he covered that a bit, and he dug a bit further into it, but he was calling it blatantly as this is the move now towards post-humanism. Yes, that includes transhumanism. You know, the two sort of go hand in hand. They're a bit like the multiple different genders, in the same fashion. There's going to be multiple sort of sort of like almost like subcultures. There'll be sub-branches of trans. It won't just be labelled as a singular transhumanism, depending on what people have put into themselves, or how they alter themselves. But post-humanism, I think, is a good general description to give it, because however you look at it, they want to alter people, alter us to such a degree that the strictly accurate description of Homo sapiens sapien, which is the academic jargon for us, that's what we are now, Homo sapiens sapien, that is going to cease to exist, because now you will be Homo trans sapien or something along those lines, trans Homo sapien. You will no longer be the Homo sapien as defined. It is being altered. So how else do you describe that other than that is literally genocide? Because you're talking about getting rid of, in one way or another, eradicating an entire species, the species known as Homo sapiens sapien. It sounds extreme, but he covers, as I say, like he does, which one of his greatest abilities, where I've followed his work for years, he will point you towards a wealth of information that proves this from their own mouths, from their own work, from their own books, from their own papers, etc., etc., etc. So all this constant toing and froing of, that's just speculation, that's just conspiracy theory, you live in the fantasy world. No, go away. It's time you got over yourselves with that bullshit, that naive, childish mindset. Yes, there's a lot of bunkum that gets pushed around on the internet and also in the general media world, and there has been forevermore. Ever since we've had the ability to, create that kind of documents, media documents, even on fucking clay tablets, there was propaganda. So to claim that this is something just particular to modern media world, no. That's always happened and always will do, because people have creative minds and they come up with fictitious ways of describing stuff and explaining ideas and whatever. So yeah, it's an obvious truth that not everything you encounter out there in the world of information is true. That should just be a plain given to everyone, yeah? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everything you see and hear is automatically false, which is primarily what the state system has been trying to push onto people for the last few years, unless it comes from us, that's me pretending I'm speaking like they do, unless it comes from us or one of our recognized, authorized truth dealers, then it's fake. It's automatically fake, dismissible. And it brought it home, I think, more, but I think I did mention this last Wednesday, when this now recurrent thread of the question of where did the alleged illness arise from? Could it be from a leak in a lab in China? That thread of investigation, or those questions, that what at the time could have been labeled as speculation to begin with, until you begin the investigation and work your way through the paper trail, that was forbidden. If you put up any information pointing to that, the mainstream platforms would cancel you and remove all your videos, and
you would be fact checked out of there.
Exactly. The fact checkers, the recognized, authorized truth dealers said, no, that's crazy, silly, conspiracy, fictional bunkum. You're not allowed. You're a naughty person. Yeah. Whereas now, all of a sudden you can talk about that question now, because now they actively want people to blame China and blame that whole lab leak scenario. Yeah.
The Wuhan scandal.
So if that that makes a good example of how the state system will clamp down. We can have a long pedantic argument about how there is a certain need for them to treat information in this kind of manner. But when it comes to the whole situation as it's been playing out, it's like, no, you cannot do that when it comes to this kind of question, and certainly not when it comes to the kind of scientific information and investigation that needs to be taking place. You can't have that attitude. Good science is not one-sided. It has to be falsifiable, which requires investigation. Same as the current regime of the jabby jab. And we've been pointing this out all along. It is an experimental phase that they're still doing, because there is, no documented testing.
No standard.
It hasn't been run through a normal test process. So we are still in that test process, but a scientific test process like that, as described as they would normally do with such a pharmaceutical concoction, would have a control group. You cannot have good science. I'm saying good science just to make an emphasis on the, not the trust the science bullshit. Really shouldn't need that adjective. People should know what's meant by the word science. It shouldn't need to be described as good or bad or whatever. It's just science. But if it was science, there has to be a control group. There is no control group, so therefore the whole thing is bunkum. It's not even science. You can't even say that they're still in the experimental test phase, because there's no control group, so it's not falsifiable. So therefore it's a completely defunct experiment. It's void. If you tried to enter that as a thesis in a university somewhere, they'd just tear it up and say, fuck off. You just wasted your entire time at this university. The whole thing is bogus. So when you've got those kind of examples, and people might say to you, well, there's such and such information out there from, this particular source, say it's a doctor or an institution that does like the evidence-based research, evidence-based medicine and things like that, groups like that. a lot of the general public's attitude will be, well, I haven't been told by the government that those are authorized, sanctioned truth tellers, so therefore I'll just ignore what you're saying to me. And we come quickly towards, and I know I've talked about this before in recent broadcasts, we come quickly towards the crux of the point, which what this whole thing is relying on is belief, faith in
Your
the
energy.
governmental system.
Yeah,
Obedience or fealty. You know, which is why it's so akin to that metaphor of the bend the knee and the corona, the crown, etc.
Yeah.
They are relying on the people who have given absolute fealty to that state system. So whatever the state system says to them, they're not questioning it. They're not even willing to question it. For some of them, they actually find it frightening, almost terrifying to look into any of the questions.
Yeah.
There was a particular story in the media, and I think it was a Telegraph. I haven't got a link to this, sorry, because it's out there if you want to go looking for it. And it's not exactly like there was anything major in the blurb of the article. But for me, it helped make that point about what I put in the subtitle, you know, the psychosocial engineering. And that's as well lending from conversations recently. But in this article, they had features this woman. And in particular, I remember in the picture, I thought, you know, dude looks like a lady. Because he looked like a guy wearing a dress and a wig.
That's a song, that, Cookie.
Yeah, it is. You know, dude looks like a lady. And the article, I think it's titled something like, Why I'm Unfriending My Unvaccinated Friends. And it's basically this middle-aged or later-aged, I think she might have been in her 40s, early 50s, something like that, woman talking about how she now does no longer feels comfortable with being friends with some of her oldest friends that are saying they don't want to get vaccinated. And she comes up with various little sort of anecdotes in the article to explain, you know, why she feels that way, although she never actually really explains it properly. She just says things like, well, you know, one of my friends said they researched it for themselves and decided it wasn't worth the risk. But I assume that when they said research, that just meant they looked at some pseudo-scientific articles on the internet. In other words, she didn't pursue any research for herself. She just accepted in absolute fealty what the state system had presented to her, you know, the fear porn shit they've been pushing, and she just automatically dismisses any other possibility.
Where was the article, Cookie? Where was this?
I think it was the Telegraph. It might have been the Guardian. It was one of the
nice bit of propaganda, social engineering.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is riding on the wave, the current wave. Please prepare. We're about to enter the third wave.
Yeah. We knew it was coming, Cookie. We knew it was coming. The third wave.
We're going to be going over the bridge of the centre of summer towards autumn, which means the natural seasonal upswell of those kind of illnesses will happen, and they'll claim that that's the third wave.
Yeah.
They'll probably blame, well, apart from people like myself, you know, not getting the jab and whatever, but they'll also blame the holiday makers who went to Portugal and shit like that. You know, they'll say that's the reason the third wave is back and whatever.
Or they've allowed, I think it's up to 10,000 people to gather at events in Wales, so they'll blame that as well, probably.
Mm.
You know, even their own rules, you know, they say we shouldn't do that anymore or whatever.
It is a narrative that they've been pushing, nudging in the last few weeks, maybe the last couple of weeks, certainly the last week. You'll see a few stories along this kind of line. Yeah. And I know actually it goes back at least a couple of weeks where Good Morning Britain did a little feature that was basically saying the same thing. It's like, you know, should we shun unvaccinated people, was kind of like the way they were presenting it. But it's that same narrative of, again, they're seeking the obedience of those that have already given fealty, and they are suggesting nudging, psychological nudging, psychosocial engineering. They are suggesting that they should treat other people that they don't know their vaccination status, therefore they should treat them as the others, the forbidden, the underclass, the unwashed, the however you want to define it, basically those who are needed to be pushed out of society, the unwanted. That's a major narrative thread at the moment, combined with, and I mean, part of it is sort of what I put in the subtitle this week, the jab the world thing. I'll play a couple of videos in a bit to try and make the point, or one in particular. But the other narrative that they've been pushing or starting to drip into the mainstream media is things such as the one was describing it as reopening anxiety. In other words, the diagnosable psychological effect that people are suffering anxiety of based on the fear of the reopening process. In other words, the people that they have terrified are still terrified, such that they don't want to actually leave their home or give up the masks or start hugging other people again. The reopening, basically, right?
Which they keep pushing anyway down the road, by the way. Yeah,
they're going to try. Yeah, I'm not sure how. Well, we'll come back to that because it's the whole house of cards up in the air at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Their
narrative is really teetering. It looks ready to collapse with the slightest breeze. But the main thing about that other narrative that they're starting to introduce, and the reason why I wanted to mention it and why it connects into that kind of psychosocial engineering stuff, they have literally terrified people. For a good portion of the population, they've made them fairly scared. They've made them fearful. But for some of the population, they have literally terrified them. Some of them, they've terrified them to death because they've driven them to suicide. Or they've driven them to the point where they have self-isolated themselves to the extreme, such that they won't even interact with their direct relatives. People locking themselves in a room, basically, near enough. Yeah,
and that's happening a lot. And it's so sad.
When you've affected somebody to that degree, they don't come out of that quickly. It is, I want to say the equivalent of, but I don't think it's just the equivalent of. I think it is literally this in a diagnosable sense. It is PTSD, right? They have instilled such terror into quite a few people that those people now are suffering from PTSD in relation to giving up their sense of control. So because they've given them this level of fear of being infected or infectious agents, which includes other people as vectors of infection and whatever, they're now creating, or they have created personality responses similar to like the classic germaphobes. People now have an anxiety psychosis, an anxiety problem related to infection, to germs, basically. Even though, they'll say it's a virus, not a bacterium and blah, blah, blah. It's the equivalent of germophobia. That is giving them PTSD. So they're rebranding that as reopening anxiety. Why would they do that when the diagnosis already exists in psychological literature? In the world of therapy and academia, this kind of problem is already listed and diagnosable and treatable and blah, blah, blah. They don't need to come up with a whole new diagnostic label or subcategory, because they're trying to create it as a completely separate subcategory because it relates to lockdown. And they'll claim that sort of individuates it from the other diagnoses, whereas it doesn't. It's just a form of PTSD from trauma. Right? You put people through a year's worth of terror porn, fear porn all over the media, and you've given them PTSD. How do you now get them out of that state of mind? I've made the point over the last probably couple of weeks about how I feel, I sense, I think, and there's a certain amount of speculation to this. If people have listened to me for a bit, you know what I'm like. It's sort of almost like reading the tea leaves kind of thing, looking at the media saturation and whatever. I get the impression that they have lost control of the narrative. They're trying to rewrite it on the fly to give themselves an out in one form or another, while at the same time securing as much as they can. Yeah, they've realized that they've been spotted in the treasure room, so they just create some distraction and try and grab as many bags of gold as they can before they get booted out, yeah, and before they have to run out the door. That process has led to things like can't quite see him on this background. I'm going to let me change to, if I put that up, will it show up? Yeah. This is like, yeah, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, sort of rapidly losing his sheen in the public eye as he's been called out in various different ways, including the release of those emails, which I mentioned last week. Yeah, and there's lots of stuff out there about them. So you can go and have a look for that, look into that if you want to. But also like Billy Bob Gates, he's sort of losing his public sparkle.
Yeah, now he's divorced.
Going through these debacles and whatever. Bojo has been accused by Cummings of being inept, the same as Hancock. They've all failed. So they're laying the ground for this narrative of, oh, well, we tried, but it was such a chaotic situation. Everything got so mixed up and confusing that, sorry, folks, we just failed to get it right. We're terribly sorry. We're going to retire now. Thanks for all the money.
But we'll be better prepared next time. And now fully prepared. Now we've got this, that, and the other.
And if we continue with the medical martial law security state, then everything could be safe and fine. Yeah. But it's that stage of the narrative is starting to creak and sway and collapse a little bit. It's starting to fall apart, basically. So they're getting ready to shift. Yes, some of them might get thrown to the walls or thrown under the bus, as they say. Like Fauci, I think, will probably end up getting thrown under the bus. Hopefully the same as people like Hancock and Bojo. But anyway, we'll see how things develop. But the reason I'm making this sort of observation is to say, translate that observation or transpose that observation of how they're trying to adjust the narrative so that they have an out. Yeah, they're trying to adjust their position because they know the whole thing's coming down. So they're sort of getting ready to leg it, basically, to get out of the harm's way if they can.
Yeah.
They're doing the same for the fear narrative that they have imposed on the general public via the media. So they're starting to offer them psychological outs. So things such as reopening anxiety. So take, for example, the article I mentioned about that woman talking about how she wanted to unfriend people because they've not been jabbed. She's suffering from anxiety. Yeah, she's got a germophobia psychosis such that she's afraid of infectious vectors, even if they might have been one of her lifelong friends. Now all of a sudden they're nothing but a walking bag of germs and nastiness, and they've got to stay away. Oh, evil. Yeah, that's a form of psychosis. To make that kind of switch with somebody that you've known for a long time in your life, even if it's somebody you don't know well, even say it's a big shift in attitude.
And you can't just switch it on and off, can you? Because there was
exactly.
As you said, there was an article we mentioned, wasn't there, a couple of weeks ago, I think, or more than a few weeks ago, giving them the out. And you mentioned this then, giving them, they're beginning to plant the seeds now, saying, oh yeah, oh dear, oh yeah, we haven't realized that would be the case, and all these people will get, they wouldn't get any better because their mental health has just gone down the tubes.
Yeah, it was the article that featured some excerpts from that new book from Laura Dodsworth, The State of Fear, which I find quite interesting. That from the bits I've seen about it, when I've listened to the interviews, I've listened to a couple of interviews with her, totaling nearly 2 hours worth of listening to her, and everything she was saying is like, yeah, we said that, we said that, we said that, we showed that, we showed that, we showed that. So I'm glad she's done it, because she's collated and put together a good amount of evidence and argument to show that this is literally what was happening. We were being attacked with an outright campaign, propaganda campaign designed particularly to put people into a state of fear or terror. In other words, to swamp their thought process with that cortisol amygdala hijack effect, such that people would have a knee-jerk emotional reaction rather than actually thinking through the situation and assessing the risks in a rational manner.
Yeah.
Right? So the evidence is there. This is not a theory. Yeah. And I have been arguing it is a conspiracy, because when you start to look at the various avenues of information and the things that are starting to be absolutely revealed now, like the Fauci emails, that's now paper trail documented proof. There has been a coordinated effort across the world. It's not just Fauci. It's not just Hancock being inept at health as being health minister in the UK. It is not just mistakes made in the chaos of an emergency situation. This has been a coordinated effort. All the evidence is there that there has been efforts made for many years now towards this situation. I think it's worth leaving aside, or it is in your interest when discussing this kind of thing with other people, to leave aside any speculation or accusation that they created or manufactured the alleged illness in some fashion. The reason I say that is because I think that's a psychological trap that they're deliberately trying to push the conversation into, because they know that causes people to just argue with each other, argumentum ad infinitum.
Yeah, people addicted to the news, the TV. Once this information comes out, you know, I said back in the day it was a psychic attack on everybody on the globe. It was there to do exactly what it's been doing, you know, putting people into these state, you know, shock almost, you know, and not being able to live again. And you know, they've already maybe been struggling anyway, and then it's finished a few off. And it, you know, it is an attack on literally the globe, like you said. It's not just Europe; it's all over. It's a global thing. They're attacking us and the good people on the planet, and trying to get us to come into line with whatever. And yeah, I still think they're going to pull something else myself, but yeah.
Well, potentially, as we're progressing, I think.
Yeah.
I agree with you totally, because they're going to get more and more desperate to try and either protect and sustain their lie. Because that's the thing with that kind of thing. I know I've ranted about this before, and I got a bit sort of esoteric trying to explain the point of how the lie or the illusion is counter to reality. Therefore, because the natural laws always pull reality back into balance, a lie cannot be sustained unless it is constantly repaired. It has to be constantly maintained and repaired and secured, because otherwise just the natural laws of reality destroy the illusion. Because it gets drawn back into reality where it is equalized and the illusion is dissolved. So they have to constantly maintain it. If they can't, or if it keeps continuing to fall apart at a rapid pace like it is, then
the world is waking up.
Their next usual move, their standard sort of operating procedure methodology, is they'll do something else. There'll be a false flag, or there'll be another major emergency, or there'll be some major conflict zone or start up, or they'll claim there is, you know, like we've always been at war with Oceania. They will do something like that. I speculate that it's more than likely going to be something cyber connected, probably with the financial system, and aligning with Mr. $1 trillion, Mr. Schwab, and his preparations for the big cyber collapse that he said is going to happen sooner or later.
Because he's just waiting to press the button.
Yeah, basically. And especially when they've got people like Billy Bob on board.
Yeah.
How many Windows operated systems are there out there?
Or
imagine what would happen if just one month, it just so happens that the next update for Windows, because they do an update every month. The next update for Windows just happens to include a very special little bit of code a bit of an icky code. You know, they call them viruses on computers. You know, a funny coincidence. You know, virus. And all of a sudden, all the Windows operating systems around the world just all fuck up at the same time.
Well, there's been a lot of sun activity recently. I don't know if you've been following any of that.
Yeah, it's been kicking up quite nicely.
It's been really kicking up, and who's to say that maybe something on that level could happen where these things are just taken down anyway by some CME or something that just takes there. But we don't realize just how much the world's operated by satellites and how many things have been hooked into these things now. And they suddenly aren't there, or there's a big, boom of a big pulse of electromagnetic energy. Yeah, we'll see. That may. I mean, like I say, I don't know. It could happen. Might not. It's one of them. It's interesting though how the sun goes through these different activities, and if you look at things that happen on the Earth over the years, with catastrophe and Earth changes, things like that, geographical, shifts and all sorts going on. We've talked about it before, but even the Earth's tilt has something to do with things that have happened in the past.
Yeah.
So.
And the tilters have been affected by major earthquakes and volcanic explosions.
Yeah.
So it's not. I know the sun is the primary driver. That's the largest influence near to us. So of course it's the primary driver. But yeah, there's been other stuff as well. But before we go into that kind of subject, because there's another connection to that that I want to come to later, let me play this this one video clip. I'm a little bit dubious about playing the whole thing, but it's for fair use, for comment and criticism and political analysis and all the other usual subcategories under fair use, which I know we are well within. So all you YouTube employees out there, if you're watching, just make sure you know what you're doing. Because if you claim that we're somehow making money or profit out of this, it's pretty fucking obvious that we're not.
No,
this is done purely for comment and analysis reasons, not to try and exploit or profit out of the work. So you may have seen this on the Andrew Marr show over the weekend. They've dragged him out. He popped up out of the shadows a few weeks ago, or maybe a bit more, and started spouting some of the crap like he used to. And if you are old enough to remember when he was actually, in Parliament and doing all this shit, he was very, very much in favour of identity cards. They tried to push that idea on us at least a couple of times.
That would have been about 98 time, sort of. 99. They were sort of thinking of that.
Yeah, that eventually morphed, as far as I remember anyway, if I'm not getting the details right, I'm sure somebody else will put it in the chat. That eventually morphs into the ID 2020 system, or it gets linked into, I think, the ID 2020 system. But yeah, that hasn't gone away. That's still there in the background. But for efficacy, for efficiency, to actually get the job that they want done, which is to get everybody registered and on a biometric digital ID system, blah, blah, blah. A alleged pandemic is a perfect way to do it, because they've now got some form of justified excuse to explain why they need you to be on this register.
And this is a man who loves to go to war, by the way, based on the evidence. And
45 minutes. He said we could all be dead within 45 minutes if Saddam decided to do his thing.
But it was 1 million Iraqis instead.
Yeah. But let me play it, and we can
go on,
stop it and start it as we're going along.
Medical reason, my view very clearly is no. And I think that's why it's important to give people a real incentive to get vaccinated, because if you are vaccinated, the evidence is absolutely clear. It reduces the risk of transmission and it reduces the risk of hospitalization or death.
So would you make them mandatory?
I don't think you can make them mandatory, but I think, and this is what we're suggesting today, by making it clear that, for example, if you are vaccinated, if you're double vaccinated, it should be much easier to come in and out of the country. And indeed, around the world, I think you will find that countries start to distinguish between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated.
That's it, basically. That's a nutshell of it. And I mean, look at the blankness in his eyes.
Nothing there. He looks like sort of some demon.
That's him. I would argue that's him recalling the required information to suit the narrative that he's meant to be pushing. So he's actually zoned out momentarily there while he's accessing his memory of the documentation or the talking points that he needs to implant into the conversation. Yeah. Very, very similar to a lot of them. You'll see that kind of zoned out effect that they get in mid-speech. That's them trying to recall to mind, oh, what does it say on such and such page of, the narrative I have to push?
Who am I?
Yeah. How am I managing to say something completely contradictory and yet not succumb to the immense dissonance and cause my own head to explode? Yeah. Because he says we can't make it mandatory, but there are going to be infrastructures in place such that you won't be able to travel unless you have it. So in other words, it is mandatory if you want to travel internationally.
Yes.
That is a form of coercion, which is the equivalent of making it mandatory anyway. So in other words, they are making it mandatory.
People, unfortunately, won't go on holiday, so they'll have it, won't they?
Well, this was partly why I wanted to, apart from just the fact that it's another example of Tony Blair saying completely contradictory shit like he does, just lying to people straight face, like the 45 minutes lie and whatever.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact that this is a point I've been making for quite a while now. As I was talking about earlier, they know the narrative is falling apart, so they're less likely to get the majority of their end goal agendas, or they're looking at the possibility that some of their end goals are going to not be succeeded. They're not going to attain them. So instead, they're trying to grab what they can now. They know they've already got the general acquiescence of the public into having vaccination passports for international travel. Because, as I've been talking about for quite a while, many months, a vaccine passport is already in place because you can still internationally travel. But to do so, all the airlines, not the governments are just issuing guidelines, but the airlines themselves are asking you to show proof of either a test that shows you're negative and then you do all the quarantining and all that kind of stuff, or show proof that you've been vaccinated. That is a vaccination passport for international travel. So they know they've got a good portion of the population already acquiescing to that requirement. So he's using that deliberately as a point. Partly it's that temptation thing, oh, you really want to go on holiday, you better do what we tell you.
Well, we need a freedom airline.
Naked airlines. I've been saying it for years. If they did naked airlines, all their bullshit about security and whatever would be out the window.
You mentioned Corbett before, and I can't remember who he interviewed, but this lady was setting this type of thing up, or looking into setting this type of airline up, or this type of travel, because there is going to be a huge demand for that travel, and it's whether or not, like you say, it's
Dolores Cahill, I think, when they were talking about the right to travel and stuff like that,
And like you said, Cookie, it's just the airlines that are following the guidelines. So it's whether the airline is, is it seeing a drop in business? There's a whole sector there that it could make millions out of. They're just, this is how maybe it will go. And all this at the moment is just because people have been locked down for a year and whatever, and they want to go on holiday. They're so just desperate to, do something.
Think about that level of anxiety and level of stress.
Yes.
Now that people have been tortured for more than a year.
Yeah.
And I'm not being hyperbolic using that word, because if you did this kind of thing to a prisoner of war, you'd be done for crimes against humanity, because it's torture. What they are doing is classified as torture under international law, because they are subjecting the public to a saturation of fear propaganda. That's the equivalent of a POW in somewhere like Guantanamo being forced to wear headphones all day long that plays propaganda messages into their ear roll. That is classified as torture.
Or Dolly Parton songs.
Yeah. Well, I did like, there was a parody version of that. There was a woman singing at the last London March, which was quite good. But yeah, it's mainly just to, like I say, use Tony Blair in a manner that, you know, he is such a puppet tool. He's a flesh puppet. So, you know, to make that example of how they know most of the public are not really okay or like the idea of a domestic passport. In other words, some show your papers thing to go in the pub and whatever. But people are obviously already going along with the international passport idea because, look, they're already wanting to fly. As soon as you give them any opportunity, they want to go on holiday. And that's not even bringing in the argument about people have been coming into the country by plane all through the year. Yeah, we weren't allowed out, but people were allowed to come in by plane. So, you know, again, all part of the charade. But it was mainly that point about him making a very clear contradiction, which I think you've got to be really struggling with your cognitive abilities if you can't hear that outright contradiction in his statement. It's not mandatory, but there's infrastructures in place such that you won't be able to travel unless you do it. Excuse me, sir. What's the definition of mandatory? Yeah,
it's forcing you or coercing you, because psychologically, like you said, this whole you've been talking about right from the start, the psychological operation on us. You know, this social engineered way. Now they want to, you know, now run society in this different way.
Well, this is why I noticed this in the chat. Hello, sorry I haven't done a shout out for the chat. It's so safe had put this in the chat. Cookie, can't believe you think they will collapse. I'm guessing you're referring to like me saying about the narrative collapsing and stuff like that. I think the backbone of the narrative has fallen apart. They know it has. It's flailing all over the place. There is a wealth of information, evidence, and highly reasoned and experienced argument from various experts in the field, you know, doctors, professors, etc., that is available out there if you're willing to go and look for it. In other words, do your own research and go out and look. But for the mass of the populace, or certainly for a good portion of the populace, they're only being subjected to the mainstream media bullshit that they're being shown. And for a lot of them, even when they start to get that little itch and they think, oh, I'll just look for some confirmation to what they're telling me now, most of the time when they go looking for confirmation, they go to mainstream media sites. You know, so they'll go to the NHS, or they'll go to Reuters because they want to look for a news story, or they'll go to somewhere that's been fact checked. Yeah, they'll look at an article on the BBC or Channel 4 recently, I think it was, did a sort of debunking of the conspiracy theories over the last year kind of shit, like they've done before with other stuff like 9/11, you know, fucking Lego towers.
Just remember this, it's all shit. It's all shit.
I appreciate that for the majority of the public, they're going to still be hearing the same messages. Because one of the key things, I couldn't think of a way of including this in the subtitle to sort of point at it as a main point for tonight, but I put it in my notes to remember to mention it. One of the key things that they are absolutely reliant on to keep this whole charade going towards the goals that they're trying to achieve is that we are in an emergency situation. Yeah, it is a pandemic, as they keep saying. I did sort of make this point a few times recently. They have to keep up that charade, that lie, that illusion that there is a pandemic, because all of the legalities that they are claiming are based on the fact that we are supposedly in an emergency situation. So, for example, all the jabs are only been authorized to use in an emergency situation. So if it's revealed that there is no emergency, all that justification suddenly vanishes, and all of a sudden they would supposedly have to stop doing what they're doing. You know, obviously I don't think it's potentially going to get that way until it actually really falls apart. But the reason I'm more confident in saying that the narratives are falling apart is because of, and maybe this is sort of just kind of like a a longitudinal observation based on the fact that I've been looking at this kind of stuff for many years. There is a habit. It's just, I think it's a natural process in a way, that they have to react to the effects of what we are doing. And I know, I'm absolutely certain that there will be quite a few people out there, a lot of the debunkers and naysayers and just agitators, whatever the fuck they are and why they do what they do, doesn't matter. But I know there'll be a lot of them will say, like, oh, he's being all megalomaniac again. He thinks he's so important that the government is reacting because of what he does. He's such an egomaniac. I'm not just me on my own. Yeah, it's not just me talking about these kind of points. There are literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people out there talking about the same things. We may not all be on exactly the same page, but we may only be, you know, 1 or 2 pages apart, difference from each other in the same book. Yeah. This as well was part of why I wanted to mention about the psychosocial engineering. If you're not sort of into those kind of topics, those academic areas of sociology and psychology, you might not be aware of the fact that they'll use the terminology of psychosocial to refer to effects that are coming from the individual and affecting society at large. That includes also when they attack or put into the individual certain messages and how those messages then relay out into society at large. So a major part of why they've been able to do a lot of what they're doing, and certainly I would argue a major reason why a lot of people feel like they're the only one with these questions in their mind, they're the only one who's looking at the situation and thinking it's wrong in some way, that sense of isolation has been amplified by the use of the modern technology of things like social media. Social media individuates people while giving them the illusion that they are part of a mass conversation. They are not part of a mass conversation because there is always a middleman standing between them and the other person they're talking to. Yeah, there's a middleman here now with the YouTube platform system.
Yeah.
That YouTube platform system can influence or interrupt what we're doing whenever it chooses to. And when it comes to how most people make use of the internet, you know, and they're surfing and they're checking the major platforms, check their updates and notifications and all that kind of stuff, that even more so is an opportunity for the system to put its nudging, its NLP, its subconscious manipulations, its symbolic influences into the messages that are being received by people on an individual basis. So they no longer need to have a loudspeaker on a pole. You know, I'm thinking about kind of like the situation in the background image, you know, where there would have been a loudspeaker on a pole, which would be broadcasting propaganda messages or instructions from the tyranny of how you're supposed to behave, you know, like everyone walk on the left, you can only march in 2-step time or whatever, you know, sending out their messages to constantly reinforce the tyranny, the tyrannical situation. They don't need to do it that way anymore. There are those kind of platforms, like most of the mainstream media obviously operates in that kind of way. They're broadcasting to multiple people all at once. But the real effectiveness is when the message is individualized to you, the receiver. And this has been proven again and again and again to actually be active in the internet realm. Fartbook has been caught out more than once and had to pay fines. You know, they've been judged in court and found guilty and paid fines and blah, blah, blah. They have actively manipulated the end user, yeah, without their knowledge. You weren't asked if you wanted to take part in an experiment, in some kind of psychological experiment that they decided they wanted to do. You weren't asked. There was no consent. There was no informed consent given. They just did it. And they're doing the same thing now constantly. Yeah, this is part of the great data rush. You know, the data is the new gold. The data is the new ultimate superpower. This is why they want that individuated connection to you, to atomize you into a perception bubble, so that you feel like the reality you know that makes up your world is presented to you by that screen. So it's a certain shape, a certain size, a certain coloration, whereas reality is obviously something much more than that. But in that manipulation, they can present to you the constant idea that you're the only one with those questions. You're a strange person if you think things like that. You're a conspiracy theorist. You're the oddball. You're the abnormal. You're on your own. Nobody else thinks like you. If you bring these questions up, you're going to get ostracized. It'll just be you on your own in the wilderness while everybody else is having fun in the big city. It's that, I know that sounds very direct, because I'm trying to sort of, get rid of the fluff and describe it for what it is. But it's obviously not presented in that way. It's much more subtle, NLP style, nudging, etc. But the point is, they know that by addressing you directly, individually, giving you things that they know are more likely to work on you, because part of the data profiling is not just working out the things you like to buy or the things you like to have fun doing in your spare time or whatever. They also want to know what pisses you off. They want to know what makes you upset, what activates your emotional center, which particular emotions are activated by which particular signaling. This kind of information enables them to figure out how best to present the information to you so that you're more likely to accept it, or at least not question it or try and resist it. Most of the time you'll just put your head down and go along with it. That is a major key thing they rely on to keep the mass of the population just going along with it. Don't look up, don't question, don't be the Spartacus, because you'll be Spartacus all on your own. There's constantly that subtle pressure included in all their messaging. This is why that kind of meme, I suppose really it's more accurate to call it a trope, because it's been around for such a long time and it gets repeated again and again and again. That constant trope of you are just little old you can't do anything, because how can just you on your own deal with a system that dominates the entire planet? Because it does. I know we've got this illusion of all these separate countries and whatever, but the majority of them all operate under the same infrastructure of laws and codes and means of exchange, etc. So there already is a one world system of trade and exchange, but they want you to feel like what you do, or what you might even consider doing, can never ever have any hope of making any change, because it's you versus Goliath, basically. But what they won't admit, and the reason I'm saying all this long diatribe, about like psychological manipulation and whatever, is that psychosocial effect. They know that what messages they put into the individual ripple out into society, and vice versa. They know that if you do start thinking for yourself and asking your own questions, that also has a ripple effect out around you into society. Society follows norms. The reason they're called norms is because they represent the middle of the road normative behavior of the mass of the population. They're the pathway that the herd walks by choice. They're not being forced to. Not necessarily anyway. That is the direction that they choose to go. So they're referred to as norms, normative behavior, etc. They know that if the mass of the population suddenly start to have a different attitude to certain things, then the rest of society changes. Because that's, it's the mass of society that is created by the mass of the population, not the other way round. The Queen does not come out of her house and build entire towns for people to live in all on her own. But the ripple effect of the infrastructure that is under her overarching monarchistic system creates that possibility, of towns being built for people to live in, blah, blah, blah. And the response of the system, certainly over the last few months, as the narrative has been creaking and starting to fall apart, and more evidence has become obvious, and the dissonance of their claims of things such as, you know, alleged pandemic, well, where are all the bodies in the streets? Why are all the crematoriums not overflowing and unable to work because the influx of bodies and what? It's just not there, is it? The evidence is not there. The reality around people does not represent the lie that they keep telling them on the screen. So the screen is saying the world is one particular shape, but when you actually look at the world, it's not. It's a completely different shape, right? So for me, over a long period of time, I've seen how when the system starts to do things like pumping out articles, news media articles, such as that woman talking about how we now need to start unfriending our friends because they ain't had the jab, that is the system responding to the situation that more and more people are starting to ask questions and realize they've been stuck in a dissonance and are being deliberately terrorized by their own state system. That is the system responding. It's damage control. Yeah, that's them attempting to go, oh, the herd's going the wrong way. Quick, light some fires over there, shake some sticks over it. We'll get them back online in a minute. Yeah, it's the response effect that for me helps achieve a perception where I can see how they are adjusting their stance. I know this sounds a bit cheesy, but I treat it a little bit like you were in a dojo on the mat facing up to an opponent and you're trying to gauge what particular move are they going to try and do next. You know, and you can tell by the way they shift from one foot to another that they're going to do a particular move or style of move because their body weight is in a certain position. I know, like I say, it can sound a bit cheesy and overcomplicating, and certainly a personal perception of how I try and approach some of these questions. I don't just look for the kind of direct evidence like the study papers and things like that. I watch the general output that they push through the media, and I look for the little like NLP effects and things like we often do. You know, we pull apart the newspaper articles and say, "Oh, look."
It's the use of the words, Cookie, as well. Like say, pandemic. It's using that particular word, that particular. You know, that's what it creates.
Doing things like the mask mandate, a continuous visual reminder of some kind of bad thing happening. So when they look at the screen and the screen says, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, and they go outside and everyone's walking around and everything seems normal, but everyone's wearing a mask, then the fear they've been given from the screen gets compounded by the visual example in reality. Whereas if everyone took their masks off in that reality, the reality wouldn't change apart from people not wearing masks. Yeah, people wouldn't suddenly start falling down because of the alleged illness. No, because the masks do literally fuck all. That's why classic. I haven't got the image for this. Somebody showed it on the internet on a video I was watching. There's a little sort of sales card in a like Home Depot, home warehouse kind of shop. Yeah, and it said, please come in and check out, what was it? So even if you're wearing a mask, please come in and check out our candles, see how nice they smell. And it's sort of like, hang on, if you're wearing a mask, how can you smell the scented candles? Yeah. It reminded me of when I said last year, you know, like just somebody wearing a mask, just fart in their presence and ask them if they can smell it. And when they say yes, you go, well, there's your evidence that the masks don't work, right?
This is what ResiTube has put in the chat. It says, we are facing giant haystacks and we need a big daddy.
I never liked Big Daddy. I thought he was too silly. I always preferred giant haystacks. Anyway, yeah. Hopefully that made sense about that kind of psychosocial engineering. Part of the reason I was thinking about this over the weekend as well is in conversation with New Being in the chat now. Hello, New Being. On Steve's show last Thursday, and we were chatting in the chat box like we do. And she made the point about the social engineering effect. You know, that they're pushing more that kind of social engineering effect, because that's what nudging is about, really.
Yeah, they've been doing it for
Yeah.
so long, isn't it? I mean, we have talked about the
And
father of propaganda. Sorry, go on.
Well, I made the point that we're all social engineers, yeah, because we are social beings. Even those people who, you know, they may be labelled as misanthrope or something, you know, they don't like other people. You know, they try to keep themselves away from other people. Even that has a social engineering effect, because the rest of the people finding out about that hermit or misanthrope or monk or whatever he is who likes to live on his own, or she likes to live on her own, that is a knowledge that affects how they live within their society. Yeah, monasticism and the concept of hermitage, you know, going into isolation and spending time on your own and detoxing from the illusion effects of society, because that's what society is. It's a mass illusion. Yeah, we trade illusions with each other in the stories we tell each other. That's how we create the world. But anyway, that's another esoteric point. Yeah, that has a social engineering effect on all of us. And we all have a social engineering effect in the societies we live in that we're part of. Yeah, it's a two-way action.
Yeah.
Just like almost everything in reality, there is a duality to this, and there is a feedback consubstantiation. It requires both to be what it is. You like the image I use on the thumbnail. See if I can find, if I've got the original one in the file to show that one. Oh, that just changes the background, but that'll do. Yeah, the whole point of that thumbnail, the whole reason I use it is to make that point about the difference and the fact that both are required at the same time. It's not one or the other. It's not all herd group mentality, groupthink, and it's not all individualist, isolationist, you know, separatist. The two go together. The two work hand in hand within each of us individually, as well as obviously the way we operate, the way we interact within society with each other. So the psychosocial is something you'll find as a terminology, a jargon of terminology within the academic world, because they've put this into an academic structure. But what they're describing is something that we all naturally do anyway. It's part of what we are and how we interact with each other.
Yeah, but it's when they step in and manipulate it. That's what
exactly
is going on here.
Now, the kind of terminology like social engineering has been known for a long time, and people have talked about it for a long time, and things like propaganda, you know, and people like Edward Bernays and all that kind of stuff. The concept of social engineering is quite well known, and certainly known to the general populace. But if you start talking about things like, well, actually, the way it works in a more direct way is psychosocial engineering, because they know now that they don't really need to address 1 million people at once. They're much better addressing 1 million individuals all at the same time. That will have a much more guaranteed effect to cause change in the world around us. Because, as I explained, they're more likely to get a direct connection with you, and their attempt to persuade you will have more chance of success if they address you on an individual basis rather than speaking to you as like a crowd of people. When you speak to a crowd of people, you have to reduce the how do I put it? The complexity of the communication. In other words, I've tried to describe this before in the past. The bigger the crowd you're talking to, the lower the bar you have to use in your rhetoric. I know that might sound disparaging, and people think, "Oh, you're calling us idiots." Like, just because we're in a crowd, we're all idiots now. So you individually may not be, but by pure statistical demographics, there will be quite a few idiots in the audience when the audience is of a large enough number. So for a public speaker, in particular politicians, and they're trained in all this kind of stuff, when you're speaking to large groups of people, speak in a very simple way use less jargon or as little jargon as possible, unless you know it's jargon that the public has already been given the definition for. So like Build Back Better, even though I know the definition for that is a bit sort of ambiguous, but they planted that phrase into the public, so they can use that kind of jargon. But in general, keep your message simple and keep it focused primarily towards emotion, not rationality. If you appeal to rationality, you will get less effect. You will actually connect with less of the number in that audience. Whereas if you appeal to emotion, you'll get a much bigger popularist response. This is why most tyrannies rely on popularism.
Yeah, ask Trump when he was doing all
exactly.
Speaking to large crowds.
I want to play this clip from the Danish lands. Thanks, Lowlands Pete, for putting this clip in. I also saw it earlier today on the UK column, so I'll give them my usual shout out. I've been saying this quite a few times recently to people. You should go and watch the UK column. I'm quite okay with the fact that I know a lot of people say they're controlled opposition or they're dubious in some manner. You could say the same about every single outlet of information on the internet. You choose who you decide to look at. If you don't want to listen to them, that's your choice. You don't have to. The same with all the other people out there putting out information or talking about stuff or whatever. That's up to you who you choose to listen to or not. I'll give my own opinion on certain stuff, but I'm not telling you what to do. I'm suggesting things that you might find of interest or might be of value to you if you go and look at them. But obviously the final choice is yours. But they covered this on their show today, on their broadcast today. But I thought this is definitely worth sharing. I won't share I'll share the audio just to make the pedantic point in case people claim it's been overdubbed or something silly. This is Thierry Baudet exposes the Rockefeller Foundation in Parliament. I haven't actually put the link in for the other one, did I? Although it was only Tony Blair, so fuck him. This on the Forum for Democracy International. I'll put the link in a sec once it's playing, but you read the subtitles, please, obviously, because it's in a foreign language, unless you can speak, is it Dutch, I think he's speaking? I'm not sure. But you read the subtitles. This is, again, part of the reason why I'm saying the backbone of the narrative is falling apart. They are losing it. And more and more people are starting to speak out directly. So anyway, read this.
Voorzitter, in 2010 ontwikkelde de Rockefeller Foundation, een van de meest invloedrijke NGO's ter wereld, een aantal scenario's voor de toekomst van technologie en internationale ontwikkeling. Dit rapport. En in dit rapport beschrijft de Rockefeller Foundation het zogeheten scenario Lockstep. Over de komst van een wereldwijde pandemie en de nasleper van 2010 dus al. Volgens dit scenario, en ik heb het dus hier bij me, zouden de Chinezen als eerste gaan beginnen met verplichte quarantaine voor alle burgers, is een citaat, en onmiddellijke en bijna hermetische afsluiting van alle grenzen. Nationale leiders over de hele wereld zouden hun gezag verstevigen. Met wetten, regels en beperkingen van het verplicht dragen van mondkapjes tot lichaamstemperatuurcontroles. Bij ingangen van treinstations, vliegtuigen, gebouwen. Komt allemaal hierin voor. Maar daar houdt het niet eens mee op. Want volgens scenario Lockstep staat ons nog veel te wachten. Zelfs nadat de pandemie voorbij was, zo schrijven de onderzoekers, bleef de autoritaire controle en het toezicht op burgers en hun activiteiten en werd het zelfs nog geïntensiveerd. In dit rapport uit 2010 wordt zelfs al gezinspeeld op klimaatlockdowns. Precies waar ze nu ook al over beginnen in onze tijd. Ik citeer. Om zichzelf te beschermen tegen steeds mondialer wordende problemen, van pandemieën en transnationaal terrorisme tot milieucrisis en toenemende armoede, namen leiders over de hele wereld de macht steviger in handen. Het rapport voorzag ook goed hoe burgers op alle maatregelen zouden reageren. Helaas, zeg ik daarbij. Net als nu staan mensen te juichen als ze gevaccineerd zijn. Foto's van hun geprikte arm op sociale media. Staat allemaal in dit rapport. En smeken ze om een coronapaspoort. Voorzagen de schrijvers van het scenario Lockstep, zoals ik zei. De meer gecontroleerde wereld vindt dus, zo voorspellen zij al in 2010, veel acceptatie onder de bevolking. Burgers gaven vrijwillig een deel van hun soevereiniteit op en hun privacy in ruil voor meer veiligheid en stabiliteit. Burgers waren toleranter en zelfs gretig om meer top-down aansturing en toezicht te krijgen. Nationale leiders hadden meer vrijheid om orde op te leggen op manieren die zij zelf geschikt achten. Dat dit zou leiden tot een digitaal paspoort hadden de auteurs van het Rockefeller Foundation rapport ook al voorzien. In 2010 kon de Rockefeller Foundation de huidige technologische stand van zaken natuurlijk nog niet helemaal letterlijk voorspellen. Maar toen dachten zij al wel dat het verscherpte toezicht zou leiden tot een biometrisch ID voor alle burgers. En dit zit inmiddels in onze papieren paspoorten. Het digitaal vaccinatiepaspoort is daar alleen maar een aanvulling op. Pas 13 jaar na de pandemie zou het publiek volgens de Rockefeller Foundation doorkrijgen dat ze belazerd zijn, genoeg krijgen van de controle en de absurde machtsfantasieën van de heersers. En voorzitter, ik hoop toch zo dat de Rockefeller Foundation op dat punt ongelijk gaat krijgen. Al hun voorspellingen zijn uitgekomen, maar ik hoop dat ze hier echt ongelijk krijgen. Dat er een punt komt dat wij wakker worden. Dat we inzien dat dit een collectieve psychose is. Dat het op slot gooien van het hele land, de halve wereld, gedurende 1,5 jaar vanwege een griepvariatie krankzinnig is. Dat we rondlopen met die lullige, niet werkende mondkappen. Dat we ons houden aan die volstrekt onzinnige afstandsregels. En onze bedrijven, onze sociale levens stuk hebben zien gaan. Dat we prima eerste lijns medicijnen, zoals ivermectine, tegenhouden. Alleen om die experimentele injecties de status van toegelaten vaccin versneld te kunnen geven. Dat we kletsen over, de besmettingen lopen terug. Terwijl dit vorig jaar natuurlijk ook gebeurde. Zoals dat elk jaar gebeurt. Zoals er straks natuurlijk met de herfst weer nieuwe besmettingen komen. Zoals dat altijd gebeurt. En we doen alsof dat door corona komt. Terwijl wat we vroeger de griep noemden schijnbaar geheel zou zijn verdwenen. Maar het belangrijkste, en dat zijn mijn afrondende woorden, dat we inzien dat met als voorwendsel een of andere hysterie over deze Chinese griep een infrastructuur is opgetuigd die op elk willekeurig moment, wegens elk willekeurig voorval, opnieuw kan worden aangewend. Lockdowns, mondkapjes, afstand houden, niet meer reizen, geen handen meer schudden, belachelijke experimentele injecties laten inspuiten. Deze coronatijd was een gehoorzaamheidstraining. De Tweede Kamer en de regering Rutte hebben die training glansrijk doorstaan. Gefeliciteerd. Klaus Schwab kan trots op jullie zijn. De globalistische plannen kunnen doorgang vinden en de volgende stap richting mass surveillance en totale controle kan worden gezet.
Dank u wel.
Brilliant.
Spot on. I'm sure there's a lot more that could have been included in what he was saying, but it's obviously under time restraint. You know, they only get a couple of minutes or something to speak.
Has anyone said that in our Houses of Parliament? Anything
No.
similar recently?
Not even close.
No.
Apart from a little bit of questioning over whether the pandemic was fast enough or hard enough and that kind of question. But actually outright questioning the entire thing, no. That is considered just such an extreme, over the top and unpleasant, an offensive concept to even question whether there was anything at all to begin with to be worried about. No, you can't. Well, saying you can't, they won't. They won't ask that kind of thing in Parliament, not here in the UK, not yet anyway. Possibly as things progress, those kind of questions might start coming up. And if, and yes, I'm being optimistic here, I'm optimistically speculating, if things continue to crumble for their narrative and there's enough of a push of I'll call it important people, people who've got professional qualifications and experience and whatever. If there's enough of a push towards investigation and potentially even litigation, court cases and stuff like that, then it could be way beyond what people are calling like Nuremberg 2.0, because if it gets to that kind of level of investigation, then a massive amount of the global infrastructure that has been built towards these end goals that this cabal of eugenicists wants to achieve, there's going to be such a radical shift in the entire structure of the global society. It will, imagine like a third of the infrastructure, and I don't mean physically or people disappearing, but just all the justifications and the claims to authority and all that kind of shit. A third of the entire world's infrastructure just suddenly gone. That's the kind of effect you potentially could be looking at. And I'm saying a third, giving a sort of esoteric nod towards the 33, because often with these kind of things, they occupy the third space, or about the percentile of a third. Funnily enough, 1/3, the third wave. And I want to get onto it before we get too late, because there's another video I want to play, and it is about 12 minutes. Okay. But this links very much into some of the other stuff we were talking about, and certainly towards the possibility that there is something else going on that is can be shown to be interlinked into a lot of the narratives, certainly to do with the alleged pandemic and stuff like that, but goes way beyond the confines of just that one narrative alone. And that's all the stuff to do with the extraterrestrial or UFO or UAP narrative. And as you know, they've been putting out a lot more stuff in recent years, and now this year it's really sort of built up to a push. And I've made the arguments and the points a few times over the last couple of years about how they've been rapidly expanding into near space, in other words, low Earth orbit and whatever. That's what you call near space, and commercializing that territory, so that now we've got, like the story you mentioned near the start, Bezos going up for a fly round to go and set up his space station for world domination and that kind of stuff. And we had Trump setting up the Space Force, China landing on the moon and on Mars. The space race is the main thing that's actually really happening planetarily. The whole pandemic situation, I know this might sound a little bit like I'm being dismissive or disparaging or trying to belittle the seriousness of the alleged pandemic. I'm going to try and remember to always say alleged with that. I know that gets a bit annoying, but the alleged pandemic is really a sideshow. It's a sideshow that's a required part of the progress that they're trying to make. Maybe progress is not a good word, because that suggests that it's somehow leading towards a beneficial end result. But the goals that they're trying to work towards, the alleged pandemic situation is just an enabler. It's an enabler to give them the biometric ID network security state system globally. Because even though Tony Blair didn't say it directly in that particular clip, he's alluded to this a few times with his recent commentary about this kind of stuff. The majority of the world, in other words, most of the nations around the world, have already agreed to some kind of normalization of this situation, and some kind of universal agreement of like which particular app they're going to use, or which particular system will be used to have people registered on, so all the airports are basically interconnected and able to read it without problem. It's not only printed in one language kind of thing. It will be in machine code, so it's readable on any computer. To the point is they kick-started this situation. They enabled this situation for the sole purpose of creating a justification for them to begin that change of age, like the WEF, the World Economic Forum's description of the, you know, the fourth industrial revolution and all that shit, the change of paradigm, but primarily because it enables the security state system, you know, under the disguise of being required for health reasons and for the public health, you know, for the public good, public health argument. They need you to have a biometric ID so that they can track whether you've got the illness or the jab and blah, blah, blah. That entire infrastructure is part of how they want to tie the whole world together into a singular system. As I said earlier, you know, the world is already operating on a singular system when it comes to things like trade and finances. You know, the UCC, the Universal Commercial Code, has been in place for a long time, and they've been interacting with each other on a national basis, international basis, you know, for a long time. So that kind of element, the financial element of the new one world system, is already set up. Now they need us, the bodies, the internet of people, the internet of things includes us, the internet of bodies. They want all that tied into it as well. But the bigger picture that's going on, that has been running in the background all along for a long time, is that gradual progression towards, well, before we start colonizing the solar system, really, it would be better if we have a singular world system, a singular planetary system, because then the whole planet's resources and labor can be geared towards that expansion out into space. And you know, they've been achieving that in one way or another, including the steady corporatization of the system, such that now it's not going to be the governments and the militaries that are doing that expansion. It's going to be the corporations. You know, so many sci-fi writers described this like 30, 40 years ago. You know, Arthur C. Clarke in particular, and quite a few others. You know, it's going to be the corporations that do that expansion, but that is a part of how corporatism works. Corporatism is a more accurate way to describe fascism, as Mussolini explained. You know, it's a merger of business and state. Nothing outside the state, nothing in competition with the state, but you're still allowed to have the facade of business so that you can actually persuade people to generate labor and move goods around in an economy which generates that illusionary wealth system. But that's another, you know, sort of separate topic. But more recently, they've been pushing out this concept that there's stuff out there that we can't explain, and they're being deliberately ambiguous, partly for what is really academic honesty. They cannot truly explain what these things are. So it would not be correct for them to say, oh yeah, we think it's a UFO from outer space with little green men on board. You know, they can't say something like that. All they can say is they've seen phenomena, and they've recorded this phenomena on video or radar or whatever, and that's what they're showing you. You know, but there's also an element which they won't discuss with the general public, and that's where it connects to what you brought up earlier, the solar activity.
Yeah.
Because if the solar activity is going the way as some people speculate or argue, you know, in their hypothesis about what's actually going on with the sun, then it would generate more plasma activity here on the Earth, which includes things like sprites and plasmoids and what colloquially is known as ball lightning. You know, what most people know as ball lightning, which is plasma discharge. But those things, those what are really better described as natural weather effects, they're influenced by the solar input, so you could call them solar weather effects, but they are natural. They're just processes that the science doesn't comprehend very well yet. If you look into electric universe theory, their explanations and their hypotheses and theories on these things are much more reliable and robust, and they prove correct more often, nearly every time as far as I know, rather than the standard model of physics and astrophysics and meteorology and whatever. So a lot of what's being shown now to the people, and they say, "Oh, UAP, it's an unidentified aerial phenomena. Oh, it might be aliens, or it could also just be solar weather phenomena. It could be a plasmoid." And in experimentation, it has been documented that these plasmoids can assume different shapes. They will go through state phase changes. I think it's where the charge level within them changes such that it causes the shape of the plasmoid to alter. And you often get these kind of platonic shapes. So you'll get things like a sphere or a dodecahedron, things like that. It will form seemingly geometric shapes. And if you look at a lot of the footage that they're plastering around now, it's like, well, that thing could be one of these solar weather phenomena. Doesn't mean it's some kind of craft, whether it be secret military tech or aliens coming to visit us or whatever they're trying to suggest. It could just be a natural phenomena. Now, what I found really a little bit disconcerting in a way, because I didn't realise this last week. Last Wednesday we did talk a little bit about this kind of thing, and I showed that one image that Peter had found with the obelisk, with the unusual writing, or looks like writing, the markings on it, and the swirly thing in the middle and stuff like that. And certainly there is a push towards, kind of disclosure topic at the moment. And they're talking more and more about aliens and UFOs and UAPs or whatever.
Yeah, more and more. I've noticed that myself. And then with the Pentagon coming out and saying what they said, we mentioned it a few weeks back on the reality chat. How they were, suddenly they were surprised, or like they didn't know, or
like they've been caught off guard.
It's right, like, come on. So
it's been in history. It's been throughout history that kind of aerial phenomena, as they now like to call it, has been recorded. Yeah. So them saying that they didn't, or all of a sudden it's, oh, now we're worried about it. No, it's because they're doing the space thing, like I've explained before. Because they want to expand into space, you're going to be seeing a lot more weird shit happening up in the sky. And then if the potential of the solar activity is part of this explanation of what's actually going on, then you're potentially going to see a lot more solar weather activity. So you will see weird lights in the sky and shit like that, because that's how the sun's change is affecting what's happening here on the Earth. But what I found somewhat disconcerting over the weekend was last week on Wednesday, when we did the sort of Not the Reality Chat show, and we were talking about that kind of stuff, and I made mention about Rosa Corey and the last card, which Werner von Braun expressly told her about. From the way she describes it, he was almost obsessive about getting this point across to her, was that the way the state system, or the what we call the state, that's the disguise that they wear, that's the cloak that the cabal wear to make people think that their vote makes a fucking difference. The plan they're sort of working along, the goals that they were going to try and achieve and stuff like that. Werner von Braun was talking about this kind of shit 6 decades ago, maybe. They're talking like the 40s and 50s, because he was part of Operation Paperclip and setting up NASA and all that kind of shit, the American rocket development, blah, blah, blah. And he clearly stipulated that it would go through a few different phases. I can't remember the first one, but I know the second one was the terrorists or insurgents, which would include things like rogue nations. Nations like they accuse Saddam of being, dangerous rogue nations with mass destruction weapons and shit like that. Mm-hmm. The same is now being talked about in the sense of this new biotechnical threat. That people in their garage can concoct some strange illness to get everyone and all that kind of stuff. Then there would be the threat of asteroids. The threat of terrorists would get people into a state of chaos and encourage them towards working along the guidance of the governments. The government's protecting them, that kind of 1984 environment. Then there would be the threat of asteroids, which encourage people to work together towards creating space-based platforms, space stations, and enabling things like defense systems in space, defense systems that are probably pointing downwards towards the Earth, not outwards. And the final thing, and the way he described it, was the last card. The last card they would play would be an alien invasion. Yeah, and he described it as a fake alien invasion. I remember it's a long time ago, I was reading through some of this stuff, and it was never exactly clear about how they would fake it and things like that. I think he was certainly a clever enough guy to realize that the kind of technology they would have in our time would be vastly different to what he had to work with back then. Yeah. So he didn't need to speculate on how they would actually achieve it. It's the methodology that matters. The fake alien invasion would create that effect. Like Reagan described it as it would give the entire world a singular enemy. So it would focus people into working together as a one world system. So I know it's a bit of a tangent, it's a bit of a stretch or whatever, but it just struck me as being a bit weird that her name and that description of the last card and the alien invasion stuff was sort of like, it come to me to bring it up last Wednesday. And then over the weekend, I found out that she's now dead. She died of cancer recently. And she was the main, I would call her the main researcher into Agenda 21, who brought that agenda to public notice. Yeah, I know there was many other people, many other journalists and whatever they are, people investigating that thing and talking about it and researching it and whatever. But she was the one that really brought it into the public's attention primarily. She was the one that spent the time, going to talking events and putting content out onto the internet and putting out the book she did. I think it's called Behind the Green Mask, as far as I remember. It's one that I don't have. I think I might have to get that now. I'm curious. I'm interested to see how she wrote about it back then, because that was actually published a couple of decades ago, in the late 90s, I think, or early noughties. Because Agenda 21 was only ratified in 1992. So this sort of, for them, for the cabal, etc., this sort of final sort of amalgamation of narratives was put together such that it became an actual document that via the UN was being franchised out to all the different nations, obviously the big ones, the important ones, the ones that are actually playing ball. There might be a few here and there that are like the rogue nations that don't want to do it, but nearly the entire planet is going along with Agenda 21. So it is like the foundation document for a one world system. And when you start digging into it, like she did, researching how this actually affects people at the end of the line, at the the end of the shovel, the shitty end of the shovel, how it actually causes an effect on people and how it changes their society, the world they live in. She was pointing this out a long time ago. But that was the one, the other thing about it was the fact that she made this point about the methodologies of global narrative manipulation, as she was told about it by Werner von Braun. And if you think he had, that he was just some wackadoodle, Ken Wheeler likes to use that word a lot. I think it's quite appropriate. If you think Werner von Braun was just some wackadoodle who was talking tinfoil hat silliness, then you're a fucking moron. We're far beyond that now. We're starting to see the combinations of some of those elements of the Agenda 21. And if they keep getting away with pushing this, I think this is why now, like Bojo talked about getting the whole world jabbed. He wants to get the whole world jabbed by 2023. We can do it. We're going to jab everyone around the world. Again, I think they can sense that the backbone of their narrative has collapsed, and they're now rushing to try and grab as much as they can. And they'll keep pushing out the lie and shit based on the lie to attempt to get away with as much as they can. Yeah, but I thought I've got to mention about Rosa Koire, and I want to play a video which is about 12 minutes long, so it might last till just over the hour. So probably a good idea to say good night and whatever now.
Yeah, cheers, Cookie. Thank you tonight. And I'll be back on Wednesday. We'll be back.
Cool. I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah.
And I know there was quite a few people that were sending messages over the last week.
Thank you for those. Yeah, I was fine. Yeah, I got over it.
Yeah. It wasn't the alleged illness.
No.
But, you know, it's like if you cough or sneeze out in public now, you can see people sort of, you know, they look at you like,
yes.
How dare you? You know, it's like, oh, you can't dare cough. You know,
can't have hay.
Cough in public.
You can't have hay fever anymore, apparently. It's
yeah. That, or you hear people go, oh, it's just my hay fever. It's just my please don't burn me. It is like, you know, you've got the leprosy or something.
Yeah, it's like it's the only thing that's out there. There's no other virus. There's nothing else exists other than this one.
No.
Which, as we know, is complete bollocks. So, yeah.
Just quickly check back at my notes. I think the only thing I forgot to mention again, because I forgot to mention this last week as well, the drone killing somebody in Turkey, allegedly, according to the Turkish military reports, of course. You know, they're claiming that they've successfully killed a human autonomously using a drone. It was bound to happen sooner or later. And even if they're bullshitting, you know, if they're just trying to big themselves up, it's going to happen sooner or later. So, yeah, that's a sort of new world thing that's happening now. Soon there will be no major conflicts. It will just be robot wars everywhere. And also, just to mention, the G7 could have a long rant about all that shit. G7, G is the seventh letter in the alphabet, so it's a 77 Brigade, G7, 77, and they're meeting in Cornwall.
When is that? Is that now? Is that now, Cookie?
Yeah, I think it started.
Does it start?
I'm not sure if it starts now, which would be another interesting connection. The 7th of the 6th, 42. Yeah, but that's happening down in Cornwall. Yeah. The wall of corn. Yeah, the wall of corn is being used to keep you separated from the G7 who are going to decide how this world is operating. There's so much could rant about that, you know, Duchy of Cornwall and all that kind of shit. But anyway, I think it's much more appropriate to say thanks for tuning in, folks. Hopefully, you know, you're going to enjoy the sunshine as long as this weather keeps going. Thanks for joining in the chat. Sorry, didn't do a shout out this week. But thank you all to all the good people joining in and all the people who are just out there listening in, watching. Thank you all for giving us your attention for a couple of hours or so.
Yeah, thank you all.
Again
cheers.
On Wednesday night on the Reality Chat channel for the Reality Chat rather than not the Reality Chat.
Yeah.
On Wednesday at 8 p.m. GMT. And also please check out Steve Tagoose on the Thursday night for the Mystery Show at 8 p.m. GMT. And Doc Rock on posttruthworld.org. Am I getting that right? I'm not sure. I'll look while we're watching the video and I'll put the link in the chat if Taz hasn't already done. You have look at that. I look at the chat. There it is. Thanks, Taz. You know exactly what I'm doing there. He's like, he'll get it wrong again. He'll misremember it again. I'll put the right one in posttruthworld.net. Thank you. Yeah, I want to play this video, which was a compilation put together by Venonymous, whose channel is I Am a Werewolf, and also his backup channel, which I'm not sure, Venonymous Meet the Savage, I think it was. But anyway, I'll put the link in the side chat, and I'm going to share it and leave it to play, and then click the end button once it's finished playing. So thanks again, folks, for tuning in. There's the link. But this is a good little compilation of some of Rosa Corey's statements on Agenda 21. Click the play. Catch you soon.
Agenda 21 is dependent on the Hegelian dialectic, and that says that a crisis is created and a solution is posed, and the balance between the two then becomes the new normal. And the balance between the two then becomes the new normal, which is something that you never would have accepted. But now that there's a crisis, then you are forced or pressured to accept this new solution.
Now imagine a world where mass outbreaks of deadly diseases are commonplace. Well, it sounds scary, but that might not be too far off. The World Health Organization has warned in a BBC interview that we're entering a new phase where such a reality is, quote, a new normal.
As the coronavirus pandemic brings life across the country to a grinding halt, Americans are facing a new normal.
It is a new normal that we all have to get used to.
I know a big question, Tom, from a lot of New Yorkers. When might we ever get back to normal? The governor talked today about working toward a new normal.
So we're going to a different place, which is a new normal.
So, Bill, here we are. Many people are aware that you warned of this in the New England Journal of Medicine and during a TED Talk just a couple of years back. So what do we need to do right now in order to reopen the country to get back to, some sort of normalcy and sort of set a new normal, whatever the new normal is?
Well, I will say it's three phases. The acute phase we're in now, the semi-normal phase until we get a vaccine, and the semi-normal phase until we get a vaccine, and then the truly normal phase after the vaccine has protected all of us.
Agenda 21 is dependent on the Hegelian dialectic, and that says that a crisis is created and a solution is posed, and the balance between the two then becomes the new normal, which is something that you never would have accepted. But now that there's a crisis, then you are forced or pressured to accept this new solution.
COVID is the world's new normal.
And I'm from the United States, California. And my topic, what I speak about, is one of the most vitally important issues of our age, and that is United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development. And as I'll be talking about tomorrow, it is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world. And this is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations back in 1992. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. And so many of us around the world think that sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas.
Hi, I'm Rosa Corey with Democrats Against UN Agenda 21.com, and I'm the author of Behind the Green Mask, UN Agenda 21. And, I'm always talking about how we have to be the resistance, and what does that look like? And, I think we need to start thinking about what the resistance looks like. And, so you're thinking about it, and you think, well, getting out into the hills on your land with your shotgun. That's one vision, right? But it's likely a last-ditch losing fight with one exception. Believe me, I wish that it was that easy because, hey, all of us think that way. If you're honest, you'll acknowledge that in the back of your mind, you hold that image as an escape route. It's sort of a classic anti-hero response, isn't it? Riding off into the sunset, heading west, young man, conquering space. It's not bad in the short term. And, in fact, this fantasy has its real world benefits. You can develop some sense of self-reliance, right? If you're willing to work hard and, you can build a sort of a neo-agrarian, alternate, Edenic, intentional community kind of thing. Like in the Back to the Land movement of the 1960s or the early to mid 20th century Israeli kibbutz. You can form a sort of a pseudo-socialist farming collective, or, heck, why not go all the way Amish, right? Well, yeah, that can be good. You should be self-reliant and independent, but you can't hide. So while you're out on the land doing your thing, the county planning department is implementing the regional plan that your taxes paid consultants to develop a few years ago. And in accordance with your city-county climate action plan and dozens of programs that were developed with the junior college and local environmental non-governmental organizations, your options are narrowing. Your well is scheduled to be monitored so that your water use can be restricted. Your road access may be removed in conjunction with a land use plan that protects a salamander that seems to be under every rock that you look at. Your property taxes are increasing because your crop is not productive enough to change your designated use from rural residential to agricultural, so that your taxes can be lowered. Your diesel tractor has been outlawed. You can't get a real estate loan because your fire and disaster insurance premiums have skyrocketed and you can't pay them. So that means you have to pay cash for your property and you have no protection if there's a disaster. Rules, restrictions, penalties, fines, fees have blocked you from burning your wood in your stove, clearing your land of stumps and rocks, paving or grading your driveway, building more than one house on your land without permits, building a barn without a permit, cutting down a tree, diverting water from the creek, putting a bakery on your property, collecting rainwater, relocating the wild animal that's been killing your livestock. That's what's happening out there in the wild areas where you're thinking about going. So what's the answer? I said that there was an exception, and you're not going to really like this, so I'm going to set it up. The action plan, the blueprint, the agenda for the 21st century, Agenda 21, has been in the works for a long, long time. You might say it's been in development since the mid-1800s. And, as with so many movements, it started with an ideology, it progressed to the universities, and it moved into political and social realms. And finally, it spread to every facet of your life to make binding policy. That's a long history to combat. Every year, it's more deeply entrenched. It's like pulling weeds to remove it. Weeds with deep spreading roots and persistent seeds. In fact, persistence is the motto for this Fabian socialist movement. Slow, solid, persistent penetration into every part of physical and intellectual life. Combine that with the Nazi, Stalinist, Maoist dream of technological control. Then you're looking at an ideology that has been infused into all people, all of us, while we've been entertained and taught. Well, so what are we going to do about it? So just like that garden infested with weeds, even though it would have been better to kill the weeds sooner or to stop the seeds from getting into it at all, the work has to be done to eradicate it. But, we didn't stop the seeds or pull out the weeds. So now we have to take it back. Look around you. You're hearing that it doesn't matter who sits on the city council or the county supervisory board. You'll hear that you shouldn't have to go and beg these people to listen to you. But, I just told you that you can't hide. So you need to take over your government. When was the last time that you showed up for a city council meeting? Do you even know what day they meet? Do you even know who's on the council now or who your mayor is? Do you decide who to vote for at the moment that you're clicking the box? Have you ever been to a meeting, a city council meeting? If you did go, did you stay for the entire thing or did you leave after your item was heard? You left, didn't you? So do you know who is running your city and county governments? Are they sponsored and funded by Agenda 21 groups? I'll bet they are. We need less laws, less ordinances, and less control by long-term civil servants because they're the ones who stay for 20 and 25 years even after your mayor goes out of office. Those are the people who are instructing your city manager on how to make those rules and policies and laws that affect you. You know what? You need to recall sitting local elected people, block them. Don't allow them to take office year after year. If they support managerial membership, your city council, your city manager, being a member of the International City Managers Association, or the United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, or National Association of Regional Government, or ICLEI, and countless globalist groups, you're probably a member and you had no idea. So, you got to educate yourself and you got to show up and then you got to stay there. Run for mayor or councilor yourself or support someone who gets it and can be educated. That's what persistence is. Right now, you are a victim of it. My personal fear is that the globalist controllers will discover that they don't have to consider public opinion anymore and can just go ahead and shut everything down. Kind of like they just did. Be the resistance, weed your garden, show up and then stay there. Take 15 minutes of your day to be the resistance. You can do it. We're counting on it, aren't we? Thank you.